right? Imagine for a second that it is early 2026, and you are looking at a heat map of the global economy.
Okay.
A lot of the map is, well, it's cooling down. Europe is wrestling with stagnation. Parts of the Americas are dealing with these heavy debt hangovers.
Yeah, it's a lot of blue and green on that map.
Exactly. But if you look over at Southeast Asia, there is one country that is just glowing, absolute hot red. It's Vietnam.
It really is the outlier right now. I mean, if you listen to the government in Hanoi, they aren't just confident, they're practically shouting from the rooftops.
Yeah.
They've set a GDP growth target of 10% for the year.
10%.
10%, that is massive. They are positioning the country not just as like a participant in the global supply chain, but as the clear winner of the race.
10% is huge. I mean, that's peak tiger economy era numbers.
Yeah.
That's the kind of growth where you see skylines change literally overnight.
It is an incredibly impressive picture.
There is a but.
Always a but. And this is why we're here.
Yeah.
If you look a little closer at that glowing map, there is a flickering light.
Right.
Because at the exact same time, they're aiming for that massive double-digit growth, there is a very real physical risk that the lights could literally go out.
And that is exactly what we are unpacking in today's deep dive. We are looking at Vietnam in 2026 and really moving past the hype of, it's the next manufacturing hub.
Right. We want to look at the realities.
Exactly. We're examining the hard limits it is hitting, specifically something the sources are calling the infrastructure ceiling.
Yes, the infrastructure ceiling. And to do this, we have pulled together a really serious stack of reports for this deep dive.
Really good stuff today.
We've got data from the World Bank credit warnings, from S&P Global Ratings Analysis, from Vietnam Briefing, and several government output reports.
And the mission today, for you listening, is to answer a really specific question based on all these sources. Can Vietnam actually graduate?
Graduate from what, though?
From just assembling things. Could it go from sewing T-shirts and putting together basic gadgets to being a true high-tech green manufacturing ecosystem? Or will power shortages and regulatory bottlenecks trap it right in the middle income bracket?
Right. So let's start with that headline number because it's fascinating. The government targeting 10% GDP growth.
Yeah, that blew my mind.
But when you look at the World Bank forecast we have here, they are projecting something closer to 6.5 or 6.8%. And the IMF is even more conservative. They're forecasting about 5.6%.
That is a massive gap. I mean, 5.6% versus 10%. Usually these global forecasts are within a decimal point or two of each other.
Exactly.
Is someone lying here? Or are the banks just being incredibly pessimistic about Vietnam?
Well, it's not a lie per se. It's actually a difference in language.
How do you mean?
The banks are speaking economics. They look at the raw inputs, right? The labor, the capital, the productivity, and they say mathematically you look like a 6% economy.
Okay.
The government, however, is speaking politics.
So the 10% isn't a strict prediction.
No, it's more of it's a mobilization order. You have to understand the political structure there. In a single-party system, setting a high target like 10% is a direct signal to every provincial leader, every state-owned enterprise, and every bank to basically open the taps.
Push hard.
Exactly. It's a way of saying push hard, ignore the friction, get it done. They are trying to talk the growth into existence by setting the bar incredibly high.
So it's a rally cry. It's like shoot for the moon, land among the stars kind of thing.
Precisely. But the gap tells us something really important. The multilateral agencies like the World Bank and the IMF are looking at the structural limits.
The ceiling.
The ceiling, exactly. They are saying you can want 10%, but your infrastructure might only be able to physically handle 6%. And that creates a ton of tension.
Which brings us to the first big mystery of this deep dive. Because despite the skeptics and despite that huge gap, Vietnam is still the absolute darling of global manufacturing.
It really is.
I mean, if there are these risks, why is everyone still setting up shop there? Why aren't they going to India or Mexico instead?
This is where the data gets super fascinating. You have to look at one specific metric in the World Bank report. The headlines always talk about registered FDI or announced FDI.
Foreign direct investment.
Which is just promises, right?
Exactly. That's a CEO standing on a stage, shaking hands and signing a document that says, we plan to invest $1 billion here over the next 10 years.
Great photo op.
It makes for a great photo op. But it's paper money. A lot of those projects never happen, or they get massively scaled back when realities hit.
It's like me announcing I'm going to run a marathon next year.
Right.
I haven't bought the shoes, I haven't trained, but hey, I announced it.
Right, and we'll believe it when we see you sweating at mile 20.
Fair enough.
In economic terms, the sweat is disbursed, FDI.
Disbursed.
This is the money that has actually been spent. It's the factories actually being built, the equipment being imported, the local people being hired.
Okay, and what did the numbers say there? The World Bank expects Vietnam's disbursed FDI to be around $25 billion this year.
Wow. $25 billion in hard cash actually hitting the ground. That is substantial.
It's huge. And it's not just one-off projects anymore either. What the sources show we are seeing now is Phase 2 and Phase 3 expansions.
So companies doubling down.
Exactly. Global firms, especially in the tech sector, aren't just dipping a toe in anymore. They are building their second and third factories because the supplier ecosystems are finally established there.
That's a key point from the reading, actually. The World Bank noted that the recent support came specifically from a rebound in exports powered by global demand for technology products.
Yes.
We aren't just talking about cheap, fast fashion anymore.
No, we are talking about electronics, complex components, high-tech assembly. Vietnam has aligned itself with the future of global tech demand.
Which is smart.
Very smart. That's why the money keeps flowing even when the global economy is a bit shaky. They have positioned themselves not just as a cheap option, but as the highly capable option.
Okay, so the engine is revving. The car is fast. The destination is that 10% growth. But now we really have to talk about the road. Or I guess rather the power line.
Yes, the power lines.
Because this is the first major fault line we found in our sources. Electricity.
This is the critical but in the whole story. You can build the most advanced factory in the world, right? You can have the robotics, the AI, the highly skilled workers. But if you can't turn the machines on, it's just a very expensive warehouse.
And this isn't hypothetical. We saw this happen. Can you walk us through the crisis of 2023 from the reports? Because I think people forget how severe that actually was.
It was a massive shock to the system. In mid-2023, the forecast of a power shortage suddenly became a harsh reality.
Just a perfect storm, right?
Yeah, you had a severe heat wave driving up air conditioning use across the country, combined with massive industrial demand, and at the same time, the hydro dams were critically low on water. The result wasn't just flickering lights in people's homes. It was what the reports call production curtailments for large factories, specifically in the northern industrial parks.
Production curtailments.
Wow.
That sounds so clinical.
It does. But what it actually means is the utility company calls your factory and says, shut down your assembly line for 6 hours today.
Just like that.
Just like that. And the World Bank estimates that those outages caused losses of about $1.4 billion.
$1.4 billion.
That is roughly 0.3% of the entire country's GDP just vanished into thin air because the grid couldn't keep up.
That is wild to think about. 0.3% of GDP just going up in smoke.
And for a manufacturer specifically in the high-tech sector, that is an absolute nightmare.
I bet.
Imagine you have a massive shipment of components due to Apple or Samsung. You can't just call them up and say, sorry, the power was out today. It completely destroys your reliability rating.
So in the past, investors looked at a developing country, and the first thing they asked was how cheap is the labor?
Right, that was the moat. If wages were low enough, they came.
Yeah.
Now, electricity is the new labor cost. The binding constraint, the very first question they ask before investing is the grid credible? Can I run my lines 24/7 without interruption?
So this infrastructure ceiling, it isn't just a metaphor. It is a literal physical ceiling on how much they can produce.
It absolutely is. The World Bank explicitly recommends strengthening energy resilience because Vietnam's entire growth model is factory-powered.
No, it's juice.
It is intensely energy demanding. If you want 10% economic growth, you need a power grid that grows even faster than that. And right now, the grid is really struggling to keep pace.
And it's not just generating the power either, right?
Right. It's also about the transmission lines, getting the power from where it's generated to where the actual factories are located.
Okay, so we have a booming factory sector trying to pull power from a grid that is maxed out. But there is another bottleneck in the reports, isn't there?
Yes.
It's not just electrons that are bottlenecked, it's money, the actual financial plumbing of the country.
Yes, this brings us to fault line number 2, the financial sector and the great cleanup.
This part of the research honestly made my eyes water a bit. There was a figure regarding real estate business credit. Over $1.6 quadrillion Vietnamese dong.
Quadrillion.
Yeah.
Yes, which translates to roughly 69.7 billion US dollars.
Okay.
It is a staggering amount of credit tied up solely in property.
And why is that a problem for the manufacturing story we just talked about?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, if I'm building microchips in a factory, why do I care if a condo developer in Ho Chi Minh City has too much debt?
You care because of the spillover risk? S&P Global Ratings makes a very clear point of warning that stress in the property sector doesn't just stay in the property sector.
It bleeds over.
It hits the banks. The banks are the ones holding the loans, and they hold the corporate bonds issued by these real estate developers.
I see. So if the property developers sneeze, the banks catch a cold.
Exactly. And then banks catch a cold, they stop lending to everyone.
Including the factories.
Including the factories, including new infrastructure projects. It tightens the credit conditions for the entire economy. But what's really fascinating here is the political economy of how Vietnam handles these bubbles.
Right. The reports talked about a specific strategy.
Yes, our sources describe it as a stop-start strategy.
Stop-start. What does that actually look like in practice on the ground?
Well, Vietnam is historically very good at mobilizing credit fast to hit those massive growth targets we talked about earlier. They open the taps, lend.
Get the money out there?
Right. But then things eventually get too hot. Asset bubbles start to form in real estate. Inflation starts creeping up. So the government decides to tighten hard.
They slam on the brakes.
They clamp down. They might arrest some high-profile tycoons, freeze the corporate bond market, restrict lending.
Okay, that's the stop.
Then when things finally stabilize and cool off, they selectively thaw it out again. They start the cycle over. It's basically like driving a car with one foot heavily on the gas and one foot hovering over the brake.
It keeps the car on the road. I guess the system stays alive, but it must be exhausting for the passengers.
And it creates massive uncertainty for private capital. If you are an investor looking years out, you don't really know if next year is going to be a gas year or a brake year.
And layered right on top of this financial stop-start cycle is something else we found in the reports. The Fiery Furnace.
Yes.
Which honestly sounds like an action movie title.
Yeah.
But it's actually their major anti-corruption campaign.
The Fiery Furnace campaign has been a defining feature of Vietnam's recent history. And the sources note that it presents a really interesting paradox.
How so? I mean, cleaning up corruption is universally a good thing, right?
Theoretically, yes, absolutely. Yeah. It creates a cleaner, fairer business environment for the long term. Nobody wants to deal with paying bribes just to operate.
Right.
But in the short term, sources describe the emergence of something called signing fear.
Signing fear. I can kind of guess what that means, but explain it for us.
It means government officials are terrified to sign off on any permits or approvals. Imagine you are a mid-level bureaucrat.
Okay. If you approve a major project today, let's say a permit for a crucial new power transmission line, you might get investigated for that exact signature 3 years from now if something goes wrong, or if the political winds shift.
Oh, wow. So the safest thing for you to do personally is...
do nothing. Just let the paperwork sit indefinitely on the corner of your desk. You generally don't get fired for being slow, but you might go to jail for being wrong.
So the paperwork just accumulates.
Yeah.
And meanwhile, those new tech factories that desperately need power are waiting for the transmission lines that need the permits that are just sitting on a desk.
Precisely. It creates a bureaucratic paralysis. The anti-corruption drive, which again is morally right, is unintentionally slowing down the entire economic engine because everyone is afraid to make a move.
It's like the government is trying to upgrade its operating system, but during the installation, the whole computer is just freezing up.
That's a great way to put it. That is such a complex web to navigate. Okay, let's move to the third fault line. Because if a maxed-out power grid and a freezing banking sector weren't enough, Vietnam is also aggressively trying to pivot to being green.
Yes, this is the green ambition versus reality conflict, and it is a huge part of the 2026 picture.
The numbers in the reports here are actually pretty promising, though. The World Bank really highlighted their push for e-mobility electric vehicles.
Yes.
They noted that an EV transition could generate up to 6.5 million jobs by 2050.
Yeah.
That is a massive number of jobs.
It is an incredible opportunity. The World Bank stats show transport emissions were nearly 33 million tons of CO2 equivalent in 2021.
Wow.
So switching to EVs helps the climate goals, and it creates a massive high-tech domestic industry. It sounds perfect on paper.
But I feel like we're circling right back to the exact same problem.
We are. It is the classic chicken and egg problem. To support millions of new electric vehicles, you need a grid that is robust, reliable, and preferably powered by green energy.
Right. You can't just plug cars into nothing.
Exactly. You cannot plug 5 million cars into a grid that is already browning out just because people turned on their air conditioners and the factories are running.
So the EV dream is also essentially held hostage by this infrastructure ceiling.
It is. You cannot have a 21st century green transport sector running on a 20th century strained power grid. It just doesn't work.
Yeah.
And there's another layer to this whole transition that the reports flag: geopolitics. We have to touch on Vietnam's bamboo diplomacy.
I love that term so much. Bamboo diplomacy. Strong roots, flexible branches, bending with the wind.
It is a brilliant survival strategy. Vietnam trades heavily with the US, Korea, and Europe. That's where a lot of the investment money and export demand comes from.
Right.
But it also keeps highly functional, pragmatic ties with China because that is where the vast majority of their intermediate supplies and materials come from. It balances everyone.
But the World Bank points out that the real risk here isn't necessarily about picking the wrong alliances. It's about trade disruptions.
Exactly. Vietnam is fundamentally an export machine. Its economy is incredibly open to the world. If the world suddenly stops trading or if a major trade war breaks out in the supply chain, they are in deep trouble.
So if the U.S. and China decouple violently, or if sweeping tariffs just go up everywhere?
Vietnam gets hit hard. They are arguably better positioned than most countries to capture supply chains that are moving out of China, but they are absolutely not immune to a global trade shock.
Right.
The bamboo can bend, but if the storm is strong enough, even bamboo can snap.
So let's zoom out a bit. We have looked at the growth engine, that massive 10% ambition. We've looked at the disbursed FDI, proving that the investment money is actually real.
Very real.
But we've also unpacked the power crisis. The real estate money bubbles this signing fear in the bureaucracy and the green dream that needs power.
Yeah, a lot of moving parts.
Where does this leave us for 2026?
Well, looking strictly at the data from our sources, we can sketch out 3 potential scenarios for this 2026 to 2030 period.
Okay, give us the base case first. What is the most likely outcome according to the experts?
The base case is high growth but tighter ceilings. We see economic growth probably settling in the mid 6% range.
Okay.
Exports keep humming along. That $25 billion in disbursed FDI keeps flowing in, but the energy and property issues remain as managed constraints.
So no disaster, but no miracle either.
Right. It's not a crisis, but it's definitely not the 10% dream either. It's basically a muddle through with success scenario.
Solid, enviable growth, but with some persistent headaches.
Exactly. The lights might flicker occasionally, but they stay on most of the time.
Okay, so what about the upside scenario? What if everything just goes right for them?
The upside is grid solved plus approvals speed up. If the government can somehow break that signing fear and get the bureaucrats moving again to get the transmission lines built fast.
Got the infrastructure rolling.
Yes, and if the global economy holds up without any major trade wars, they could actually get significantly closer to that massive government ambition. We would see fewer factory curtailments and much faster project clearances across the board.
And the downside, the scary one.
The downside is the perfect storm.
Yikes.
Imagine a repeat of the 2023 power outages, but worse, hitting the really big tech parks this time. Combine that with a property bubble bursting that actually manages to freeze the major banks.
A cascading failure.
Exactly. And then throw in a global trade shock that cuts international demand for their exports. In that scenario, growth drops significantly and private investment pulls back sharply.
That is a genuinely scary picture. But I want to end this deep dive on a slightly more stabilizing note. We mentioned the population very early on, 102.9 million people.
Yes, that is Vietnam's ultimate cushion. Even if global exports wobble, you have over 100 million people, domestic citizens consuming, buying homes, buying phones, upgrading their lives.
It's a massive internal market.
Domestic consumption provides a strong economic floor that a lot of smaller, export-reliant nations simply don't have.
So they aren't entirely at the mercy of the outside world, even if that is where the explosive growth comes from.
True. But the real tiger economy game is still fundamentally about exports. That is where the hard foreign currency and the critical technology transfers come from.
Right.
Domestic consumption keeps you alive and stable, but exports are what actually make you rich.
So here's where we land today. Vietnam has absolutely proven it can attract the world's factories. The closed for business sign is completely gone.
Definitely.
But as we head deep into 2026, the core question has changed. It isn't about whether global investors want to come. We know they do.
Mm-hmm.
The money is disbursed. They are physically building the factories.
The real question is whether the country physically has the capacity to plug them all in once they are built.
Exactly. It's a question of physical physics and administrative governance. Is the power grid big enough? Is the bureaucracy fast enough to approve the upgrades?
And ultimately, is the discipline-led political system nimble enough to keep those lights on when the demand spikes inevitably hit?
That is the thought we're going to leave you with today as you look at that glowing red spot on the economic map. It's very easy to announce a target. It is much, much harder to physically wire a nation to actually hit it. Thanks for diving in with us.
Always a pleasure.